In the spring of 2003, a mother in the city of Harlan noticed something wrong with her son. He was 9 years old. He had been taking a medication called Celevra, a prescription drug for childhood anxiety, developed and sold by one of the most powerful pharmaceutical companies in the world, Calvion Pharmaceuticals. The drug was supposed to help him sleep, supposed to calm the episodes, supposed to give him a normal life. Instead, within 6 weeks of starting the medication, he stopped eating. He stopped speaking. And one morning, he told his mother he didn't want to be alive anymore. He was 9 years old. His mother, a former nurse named Patricia Cole, went to her doctor. The doctor told her this wasn't a known side effect of Celevra. He showed her the clinical trial data, the official label, the package insert. None of it mentioned suicidal ideation. None of it mentioned what was happening to her son. So Patricia Cole did what any mother with a medical background would do. She started digging. What she found over the next 4 years would shake one of the most powerful industries in the world to its core. But before we get to what Patricia found, we need to understand what Calvion Pharmaceuticals was and how it became untouchable. Case file number 002. Calvion Pharmaceuticals, the company that buried the truth to protect a billion-dollar drug. In 1979, a small research laboratory in the Swiss city of Morville was working on something nobody had successfully done before. A compound that could regulate serotonin levels in children without the sedative fog that plagued every existing alternative. The lead researcher was a neurochemist named Dr. Arthur Hess. Quiet man, methodical, obsessive about precision. He had spent 11 years trying to isolate a molecule that would pass the blood-brain barrier gently enough not to cause the blunt cognitive side effects everyone else was producing. And in the autumn of 1979, he found it. He called it Compound SL7. His team called it a miracle. Calvion Pharmaceuticals acquired Dr. Hess and his entire laboratory in 1981 for $42 million. At the time, it was the largest acquisition in Calvion's history. The board called it a bet on the future of mental health. And for a while, it looked like they were right. Clinical trials through the early 1980s showed extraordinary results. Children with severe anxiety disorders responded within weeks. Parents wept at the trial centers. Doctors called Calvion's representatives daily, asking when the drug would be available. The FDA approved Celevra in 1988 after what was described at the time as one of the smoothest review processes in the agency's history. Within 2 years, Celevra was being prescribed to 400,000 children across the United States alone. Within 5, it was in 37 countries. Calvion's stock tripled. Dr. Hess received the company's highest internal award. The press called Celevra the drug that gave childhood back to a generation. But inside Calvion's clinical research division, something else was happening. Something that the press releases didn't mention. And something that the FDA never saw. During the original clinical trials, there had been anomalies. Small ones at first. A subset of trial participants, specifically children between the ages of 8 and 12, showed what the internal research team classified as mood elevation events, irritability spikes, 2 cases of what one researcher described in a private memo as sudden ideation. The team flagged it. They wrote it up. They sent it to the Clinical Oversight Committee. And the Clinical Oversight Committee, chaired at the time by Calvion's chief medical officer, did something extraordinary. They reclassified the events, not as adverse reactions, not as side effects, but as pre-existing conditions. The children, according to the revised classification, had arrived at the trial already predisposed to these episodes. Celevra hadn't caused anything. It had simply failed to prevent what was already there. It was a single paragraph change in the trial documentation. One paragraph. And it meant that when the FDA reviewed Celevra's clinical data, the anomalies simply weren't there, not because they hadn't happened, but because they had been reclassified out of existence. I want you to sit with that for a moment. Not hidden, not shredded, reclassified. It's a word that sounds technical, bureaucratic, clean. But what it meant in practice was this. Calvion's medical team looked at data suggesting their drug might be causing children to develop suicidal thoughts, and they changed the paperwork so that data would disappear from the official record. And then they sold the drug to 400,000 families. By 1994, Celevra was generating $1.2 billion in annual revenue. It was Calvion's single largest product. The entire company's financial structure had been rebuilt around it. Manufacturing plants in 4 countries, a dedicated sales force of over 2,000 representatives, lobbying offices in Washington, Brussels, and Tokyo. Celevra wasn't just a drug anymore. It was the spine of a corporation, and corporations protect their spine. In 1997, an internal safety review, triggered not by Calvion but by a routine FDA monitoring sweep, flagged a statistical cluster. In 7 states, across a period of 18 months, there had been an unusual number of adverse event reports filed by psychiatrists treating children on Celevra. The reports described similar patterns: mood deterioration, sudden aggression, ideation. The FDA sent Calvion a formal request for all clinical trial data related to these outcomes. Calvion's legal team responded within 30 days with a package of documents totaling over 40,000 pages. 40,000 pages. The FDA's review team, working with limited resources, took 8 months to process the submission. They found nothing conclusive. The data, as presented, did not establish a clear causal link. The case was closed. Calvion issued a press release describing the outcome as full vindication of Celevra's safety profile. The stock rose 4% that afternoon. What the FDA didn't know, what nobody outside Calvion's senior legal and medical teams knew, was that the 40,000-page submission had been carefully constructed. 19 internal studies had been excluded from the package, not because they were irrelevant, because they were relevant in exactly the wrong direction. A 1993 internal study of 812 trial participants, a 1995 follow-up analysis, a 1996 long-term outcomes review. All of them showed the same thing. In children under 12, prolonged Celevra use was associated with a statistically significant increase in suicidal ideation. The effect was not massive, but it was real, and it was consistent. And Calvion had known about it for at least 4 years before the FDA came asking. They had known, and they had built 40,000 pages of other data around it, like a wall. This is where Patricia Cole comes back into the story. Because Patricia Cole, by 2001, was no longer just a mother. She was a researcher. She had connected with 43 other families across 11 states, all of whom had experienced similar episodes with their children on Celevra. She had built a database. She had cross-referenced adverse event reports filed with the FDA, reports that were public, technically, but buried in a database that required knowing exactly where to look. And she had found a pattern that no single doctor, no single regulator, and no single family could have found alone, because the pattern was only visible when you looked at all of them together. In 2002, Patricia Cole contacted a medical journalist named Daniel Voss at a national publication. She gave him her database. She gave him the adverse event reports. She gave him the names of 4 former Calvion employees who had agreed to speak on background. And she told him what she believed: that Calvion had known about the link between Solevra and suicidal ideation in children, and had deliberately concealed it from regulators and from the public. Voss spent 14 months verifying her claims. He obtained, through a Freedom of Information request, partial records from the 1997 FDA review. He found the gaps, the studies that should have been there and weren't. He found references in the submitted documents to internal analyses that the submitted documents themselves did not include. He found footnotes that pointed to data that had never been provided. In September 2003, his investigation was published. The headline read, "A billion-dollar secret." The story described, in precise and documented detail, how Calvion Pharmaceuticals had withheld critical safety data from the FDA, from prescribing physicians, and from the families of hundreds of thousands of children. Calvion's response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 48 hours, the company issued a 40-page rebuttal. They described Voss's reporting as irresponsible and factually inaccurate. They threatened legal action against the publication. They hired 3 of the most prominent medical experts in the country to issue public statements disputing the methodology of Patricia Cole's analysis. They sent representatives to brief every major news network. They held a press conference at which their CEO, standing in front of a wall-sized image of a smiling child, described Solevra as one of the most rigorously tested medications in the history of pediatric psychiatry, and described the allegations as an attack not just on Calvion, but on the millions of families whose children depended on this medication every day. It was a masterclass in corporate crisis management, and for a while, it worked. Several major publications ran counterpieces questioning Voss's sources. 3 of the 4 former employees who had agreed to speak retracted their statements after being contacted by Calvion's legal team. Patricia Cole received a cease and desist letter. The story began to fade, but the 19 missing studies did not fade because Daniel Voss had kept digging. And in January 2004, through a source he has never publicly identified, he obtained copies of 3 of the 19 suppressed internal studies. He turned them over to a congressional subcommittee that had been quietly investigating pharmaceutical data suppression practices since 2002. And in March 2004, Calvion Pharmaceuticals received a federal subpoena. Not a request, a subpoena for all internal communications, all clinical trial data, and all regulatory submission records related to Solevra from 1988 to the present. What followed was 2 years of congressional hearings, regulatory reviews, and civil litigation that reshaped pharmaceutical regulation in ways that are still felt today. The 19 suppressed studies were eventually produced in full. They confirmed everything Patricia Cole had said. Calvion settled with the federal government for $2.7 billion. At the time, one of the largest pharmaceutical settlements in history. They paid civil penalties to over 8,000 families. They were required to add a black box warning to Solevra, the FDA's most serious level of warning, stating that the drug was associated with increased risk of suicidal thinking and behavior in children and adolescents. A warning that, according to the settlement documents, should have been on the label since at least 1997. Dr. Arthur Hess, who had retired from Calvion in 1999, gave a deposition in 2005. He was 81 years old. When asked whether he had been aware of the internal safety reviews, he said he had not been involved in the regulatory submission process after 1992. When asked whether, had he known, he would have approved the suppression of those studies, he paused for a long time. Then he said, "The compound I created was not supposed to harm anyone. I designed it so that it wouldn't. What was done with it afterward was not science. It was something else entirely." Calvion Pharmaceuticals still exists today. Solevra was eventually withdrawn from the pediatric market in 2006. The company paid its fines, restructured its clinical oversight division, and within 4 years had returned to profitability on the strength of 3 new drug approvals. Its current CEO has never been personally charged with any crime. Neither has any member of the board that oversaw the suppression of the 19 studies. Patricia Cole used part of the settlement she received on behalf of her son to fund a watchdog organization that monitors pharmaceutical adverse event reporting. Her son is now in his early 30s. He recovered. Not all of them did. Here is my verdict. Calvion Pharmaceuticals is guilty. Not of incompetence, not of negligence, of a deliberate, sustained, and sophisticated decision to protect a revenue stream at the expense of children's lives. They didn't miss the data. They found the data, evaluated it, and built a system to make it disappear. The reclassification of those trial anomalies in the 1980s was not a mistake. It was a choice, and every prescription written, every child put on Solevra after that choice was made, was a consequence of it. The defense would say, and has said, that Solevra helped millions of children, that the benefit-risk calculation, even accounting for the suppressed data, may still have favored approval, that the science of pediatric psychiatry in the 1980s was genuinely uncertain, and that Calvion's researchers were operating in a field where the line between side effect and pre-existing condition was not always clear. These are not frivolous arguments. Medicine is rarely simple, and pharmaceutical companies do genuinely carry enormous risk in developing drugs that regulators and the public then expect to be perfect. But none of that explains 19 missing studies. None of it explains the 40,000 pages built to bury 3 pages. None of it explains why, when Patricia Cole's son told his mother he didn't want to be alive anymore, there was already a document inside Calvion's research division that said this could happen, and nobody had told her. That is not a gray area. That is a decision. Now, I know some of you are going to defend Calvion. Some of you are going to say the settlement proves the system worked, that the regulation caught it eventually, that no executive went to prison is not the same as no wrongdoing occurred. Make that argument in the comments. I will read every single one. Calvion Pharmaceuticals is fictional. The pattern is not. Case closed.